Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's Ronsley. This is another live recording of Should I Start a Podcast? And today you're in for a treat because we're going to talk media. We're going to talk access to cool events. We're going to talk rocking your podcast. But before that, a couple of hours ago, We Are Podcast 2022 tickets went on sale. So for 7 days, you get early bird tickets to We Are Podcast. This year is all focused on growth, growing your listeners, which is new audience, growing your revenue streams, and growing your credibility. So wearepodcast.com is where you go to get all the tickets and all the cool stuff. Actually, be in the group, We Are Podcast group. Go find that on Facebook and get all the updates with speakers and any sort of new cool stuff that we're going to announce will be announced on that group first. So go find that. Today, I'm going to talk about the mistake number 62, which is wanting everything to be perfect before you release your podcast. And by the way, we're all guilty of that, myself included. So I'm going to talk about that and give you some examples of what to do when you're in that state. And if you agree or disagree with anything on the show, I'd love for you to use the comments to let me know or let us know, because I will monitor them all because they go on all the platforms. It's like on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. So wherever you're here or wherever you're listening and catching us, really want to get your feedback on what's working and what's landing for you. So make sure you use the comments for that. And finally, today's show, we have Laura Michelle Powers, who is just amazing at really, really cool things when it comes to a podcast. He's actually the author of a really cool book, which is all that every podcaster wants to know. And it's really crazy because I've had a podcast for a decade now, maybe more, and I kind of have the same sort of things that I want, which is more listeners, more revenue, more credibility. And her book actually talks about all that. She's been on some crazy shows and has been on Will Ferrell's Burgundy podcast. So I want to talk to her about that. But Laura, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's get into the start of this. How did you get into the podcasting world? What was the first moment that you kind of went, oh, maybe I should start a podcast?
Yeah, so I've been podcasting for 11 years, and I was going through just a really big life transition at the time. It was during the sort of 08-09 recession and housing bubble burst, and I was unemployed. I couldn't find a job, and I just felt to go into this totally new direction for me, which was intuitive and psychic work. And this was totally out of left field. My master's degree is in political science, and I'd worked in government and politics. So this was a brand new area. I also had divorced my ex-husband, who was very techie. And I share that because I literally got the intuitive hit to start a podcast. I was not a podcast listener. I was not particularly tech person. You know, my ex-husband did all that when we were together. And so I literally was like, what do I do? I had to figure out what a podcast was, how to start it. And it was, you know, just like you've been a podcaster for a long time. It was such a different time to create a podcast then versus now, when there's so many like tools and resources and communities and trainings. But I just, figured it out. And very quickly, I realized the incredible opportunity that podcasting provided. And I've just been very passionate about podcasting ever since.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned before we went live about how a podcast changed your life. When you say that, what are you talking about? What are you referring to?
Well, literally everything that I do. I mean, first of all, I have, very successful business. I think by most people's standards, multiple six figures a year, working pretty limited hours. Generally, I work a couple hours a day. Some days I work more, some days I don't work at all. I travel a lot. I'm really having my sights right now and working more on television and entertainment, just because that's a passion of mine. And podcasting has absolutely led to that directly. So just creating this sort of jet setting lifestyle, not working a lot, doing things I love all the time, and podcasting has built that for me essentially.
Yeah. It's like everyone's dream come true. Let's talk about what it looks like for you right now. Where does podcasting fit into your ecosystem right now? And how much time do you dedicate towards either getting on podcasts or creating your own?
Yeah, so right now I would say I probably spend a couple hours a week on my own podcasting stuff. And then I actually right now am guesting more than I'm doing my own.
Mm,
But I share that because I've been building my own for like so long, right? 11 years.
yeah.
And so I think when you're starting out, you're going to spend a lot more time on your own. And now I literally just get invitations to be on guests all the time. I don't search it out. I just get pitched or asked to be on guests from people that I know, shows I've already been on, like people that know people I know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I am actively pitching for television, and that's really starting to come together. So for example, this week tomorrow I have a paid television appearance on a cable show. Thursday, I have an unpaid appearance, but still great, on a morning show here in Las Vegas. And I also have a TV meeting for a completely different show on Wednesday. So there's a lot happening. So I'm spending probably more time and energy on the television aspect right now.
Yeah, because you've like, to your point, you've used the podcast to build this platform. So let's talk about what that looks like. So what happened when you started, and what did you add along the way to kind of get to a point where now you're sort of pitching television? And again, that's the thing, right? I think it comes with experience to have a resume to kind of pitch to get to a point where you kind of do these pitches. So what's the platform look like? Where did it start, and like what did you keep adding to it?
Sure. So when I started my podcast, I didn't have connections or anything. I literally just like would go to networking meetings or reach out to people that I knew in the community to be like, hey, do you want to talk with me on my new show? That, at that point it had almost no listeners. It was just exciting for me to just put it out there. One of the best things that I think podcasting does is help you build your network, build potential partners, find clients, and also just get you practiced, talking in front of people in groups. So I'm also a public speaker. I have a couple of screenplays I'm pitching, and I did a pitch recently, and everyone was like, wow, that was fantastic. And I really attribute it to just, I talk all the time on podcasts, on media. So it's easy for me to just kind of off the cuff talk about something just because I'm so comfortable with doing it now because I've done it so much. So that's a real benefit. And then you just build your network contacts and connections over time and build that confidence and just learn industry best practices and standards. Every person that I interviewed or connected with, I learned something from them. I feel like it was like taking like a little piece of the puzzle, like, oh, they're doing this well, or this is how they do this, and kind of modeling it. And, if you're smart as a podcaster and you have an interview show, you will basically learn very quickly from the people that you're connecting with on the show. And then also from a monetization standpoint, it's just such an easy way to have attraction marketing. And by attraction marketing, I mean like you attract what you want instead of you trying to go out there and seek your client. Like they come to you.
Let's talk a bit about that, because obviously everyone wants to be attractable, right? Attractive, I think is the word, probably. What needs to be done for us to kind of like appear that way, or make sure that the market sees us that way?
So a lot of it is just gaining that confidence and figure out, what is your thing? Like, what is your niche? What are you known for? What are you passionate about? And then making sure that whatever you're putting out in the world matches that and reflects that. So I'll just tell a quick story about being on Will Ferrell's Burgundy podcast. So that's an opportunity where that's not a pitching thing. Like you don't pitch that show. They basically just invite you on if they want you on. So they invited me on, and after I had been on the show, and I asked the producer about their process because I was curious about how that came to be, like how they found me, and and essentially they wanted a psychic on the show. So I'm known as a psychic. That's how I'm most known. My first podcast talks about the psychic work. And so they reached out to me because they were looking for psychic. I came up in like the geographic area that they were searching. And then this is the part that I found really interesting. She said, I spent several hours on your website before I reached out to you. And I just want to share that because a lot of people, I think, don't understand the importance of their website or what they have on their website and just who might be looking at it. I mean, I even hearing that, I was like several hours, like, oh my gosh, like just thinking about, someone spending that much time and reading and searching. But, on my website, I have a media page. I had a TV reel. I had all my highlights. I had all my books that I've written. By the way, writing a book is another excellent thing to do, especially when you pair it with a podcast. So just making sure that when people connect with you through social media, through your website, that it's really clear what you offer, and also what you're about, like who you are, and the caliber and the level. So when you go on my website, you right away see, I'm a celebrity psychic. Like I'm known, that's what I'm known for. So people automatically are like, oh, this isn't just like a, everyday, charging $50 or something psychic.
Sure. I mean, and that's the thing, right? I mean, the different sort of, the different media help sort of position. And I have a similar story. This was in 2016. I got a meeting at CNBC in Sydney.
Nice.
And the idea was to get podcasting. This is back then when podcasting was not a thing, right? So get that into their systems, and it was CBS Interactive, and I had this meeting, and Darren was the guy on the other side, and he had this stack of business cards, and I'm like, those business cards, how long have they been there? And he's like, 2 weeks of meetings, man. And I was like, wait, what? That's 2 weeks of meetings, was like that stack. So I literally threw my business cards out and decided to write a book. And the book has been absolutely phenomenal in getting access to things, because it's the credibility stack, right? It's like, that's what you're trying to. Let's talk about the credibility stack for a second. Like, what have you done to keep bolstering, and what do you continue to do to keep bolstering your credibility stack?
Yeah. So the first thing, what this whole show is about, is have a podcast, be a guest on podcast. I think you immediately, even if you're brand new with a podcast, you are establishing that credibility. Like you're establishing yourself as an expert in that area. Writing a book just kind of bolsters that. And it also provides like very in-depth, information that people can seek and reach out. And then once you've written a book, I think it's so easy to write more books. Like the first book is absolutely the hardest. So just keep it going and, get focused on niche wise, what you want to put out into the world. And the media piece, I think the media piece is huge. A lot of entrepreneurs don't understand just how powerful media is, podcasting and other media. It helps build that know, like, and trust factor, and it does it very quickly. I tell you what, if you are on the news, suddenly people take you seriously. And it was really interesting to see in my family, because there were kind of mixed reactions when I started in my sort of spiritual psychic work. This is not a typical thing in my family whatsoever. I have a lot of people in medicine and science in my family. Like, this is very outside the box. And I can't tell you how interesting it was to see the shift in people's reactions once I started doing some of these bigger media things. Like, oh, I'm on Buzzfeed, or I'm on Will Ferrell's podcast. And suddenly even my own family members were like, oh, like all of a sudden this is serious. And I literally had like one client who bought a package, with me, and he said, meaning like multiple sessions at a time, which is thousands of dollars. And he said, if you're good enough for Will Ferrell, you're good enough for me. So, and it doesn't have to be just at that level. And by the way, you're probably not going to get something at level if you don't start out with kind of some kind of local TV, or, build it up, start with in podcasts. Right. But that has immediate, credibility, and helps elevate your status and your sort of trustability, likability, and your attractiveness to potential customers and clients.
Yeah. I want to ask about the middle name. Is there a reason that you say all three names? Is that a branding thing?
Yeah, I actually used to just go by Laura Powers, and I've recently started to add it. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, as I'm starting to do more television, Laura Powers was already taken. Like, it's a popular name. So my IMDb is Laura Michelle Powers. And to that credit, there's also just many Laura Powers out there. I'm a singer and a songwriter, and I've literally had so many people be like, I love this song. I'm like, that's a different Laura Powers. Like, so it's a recent thing within the last couple of years that I've started to try to add my middle name just to differentiate between myself and Smithy. Yeah. There's also a Laura Powers Simpsons character. So if you Google Laura Powers, that may be the first thing that comes up.
Really interesting. Like, I mean, it's such an interesting thing, like, that needs to be done, because then everything is the same the brand is the same, everything looks the same. It's like so powerful for a trust factor. You mentioned niches a lot, or niches, or however you want to say it, depending on where you are in the planet. How have your niches changed over the years? Like, did it start with, and what did it evolve to? What are the different ones that you started to tackle?
Yeah, so when I started my company and my podcast, it was a very kind of general healing, including spiritual healing sort of topic. And as I expanded and learned more, I tried and dabbled in different things, and I started to kind of connect in with my own abilities and, you know, realized that what I was creating was a platform for myself as well, not just for this sort of overall subject, but for what I was working on and building and creating. I think especially with new business owners, there's this feeling of like, I have to figure it all out. And the truth is, I don't think you actually do figure out exactly what you're doing until you start.
Yeah.
You really have to just kind of dive in, and it's a learning process, and it's kind of like hot cold. Like you do something, you're like, okay, that's a cold. And then you move towards where it feels warmer, and you just figure it out over time. So just go for it. Just go for it. And instead of thinking of something as a mistake, it's more like you're learning what it isn't. And that's still actually incredibly valuable information. I love the story of Thomas Edison, who incidentally, one of my first acting roles was playing Thomas Edison as a kid in a play, which is
Wow.
still so funny. But, you know, he tried, I think it was like thousands of filaments before he found the right filament for a light bulb, you know? So what if he'd just given up? You know, I think we just all have to remember that process, that we're all going through some kind of creative, you know, process, or just figuring out like what is our thing, and just basically don't give up until you figure out what that is. And also that it may be kind of multiple things. Like in my case, even, you know, I'm an entertainer. I do comedy. I used to make my living as an actress. I did improv. I'm a psychic. I'm a podcaster. And then what came forward for me, this opportunity for like the number one podcast in the country, which happens to be a comedy podcast, which was improvised, which was the Ron Burgundy podcast. So it like basically so many of these different things that I have done sort of fit really well for that particular opportunity.
It's like the reps you do that allow you to have these opportunities that kind of make itself known. It's like I think I heard it in a Wayne Dyer sort of book maybe once, about how the universe conspires in these mysterious ways once you start doing something and gaining momentum. And I think that's really what it is, right? It's like once you having a podcast, that's for me, that's the thing. Like I just did one after the other, and 1,500 interviews later, it's like, oh shit, you've been doing this for a long time. And then you're like, oh, that's why I see certain things in a certain way. And that's why I kind of like now have different ways of talking and interviewing people. And I'm okay to do these live because I've done so many of these not live maybe. So just kind of suggesting to someone, hey, I think you should do this live now is not maybe the best idea. But let's talk about this, right? I mean, this is something that blew my mind when we had this conversation on Clubhouse last year. And I can't believe Clubhouse is dead. That's crazy. But you spoke about getting access to events using your podcast. Can you talk about that? Because I feel like that is something that's not covered. And I think that you give a great sort of perspective and voice on that topic in particular.
Yeah, this is something I'm really passionate about teaching. A lot of podcasters don't think to do this, and it's such a powerful thing. Actually, if you are interested in my book, Rock Your Podcast, I talk about it. I give like an actual, you know, process for how to do it. But so in terms of my background, I started actually on kind of the other side in media relations. I worked at the University of Colorado in the press office for the president's office. So essentially, we were the liaison department for press for the university system and the president. So I was used to receiving communications and requests and things from members of the media. So I was familiar with that process from the other side. So when I started a podcast, I pretty quickly was like, oh, this is media. I'm media. And so I approached it from that perspective. And even though at the time, podcasting wasn't really considered established media, it quickly became that way. And so I started to think about, okay, how can I present this for coverage opportunities, for press access? And because I had that professional background at the University of Colorado, I was familiar with writing official documents, and it wasn't that hard for me to just use that as a podcaster. And I pretty quickly learned that as press, if you're accepted and you get a press badge or press pass and access, you get amazing access. First of all, you get it for free, right? So you're talking about conferences that are hundreds or even sometimes thousands of dollars that you don't have to pay for. And especially if you're a new podcaster or you're a new business owner in your building, hundreds of dollars makes a big difference in your bottom line. So not having to pay for it is great. You also sometimes would actually get them to set up interviews with you with speakers, people that might be even keynote speakers or charge, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars a keynote. And suddenly you're having like private access. Also, sometimes you got extra benefits like being able to go to the front of the room, or I'm a screenwriter, so I would get like, here you get into this pitch event that you'd have to pay for free. And then also the network connections that come from that. So once you get access as press, you frequently get on PR kind of press lists. So you start to get pitched by high level people. So for example, I've had Jack Canfield on my show, Jack Canfield, author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. And they pitched me because of this thing where I'm on these press lists for being recognized media. And like when they're promoting a new book or a new product or whatever, and they want to like get it out there, they're going to reach out to the people on their list. And so that's so easy for me. I'm like, yes, I would love to have Jack Canfield on the
show. How cool. I mean, it's such a nice way to think about it as well, because then hopefully if you realize you're part of the media, you kind of have a whole bunch of media ethics that come into play, and you kind of speaking and covering all sides of the story become part of the play, and you being a journalist and kind of representing the entire story also becomes part of the play, which is kind of really what I think the power of the podcast is. Because like if I think about it, like a lot of my ancestors didn't get the opportunity to like just use their voice and say whatever they wanted to say whenever they wanted to say it, right? And I think there's this underlying entitlement of this privilege that we have to just this freedom of speech. So it comes down to some really cool perspective shifts that happen when you get to have the conversation. It doesn't matter how many you've done like this, every time it's like this fresh perspective on different things. How have you used your podcast, which I feel like you're probably really good at this? How have you used your podcast to create partnerships? Like you probably partner with different brands. I mean, you just spoke about events just now, but how have you used your podcast to get like partnerships done with yourself and what you're working on?
Yeah, so there's several ways. One is just honestly connecting with other podcast hosts and getting guest appearances on other shows, which for me is hugely influential for my business. Like there's one small podcast that I can directly tie 50K of revenue to. So it's pretty incredible when you're on a show for like an hour and then you get 50K of business for it. Yeah. And the other thing is developing connection partnerships with experts that I either have on my podcast, or then I maybe have as a guest expert for a course or a product or something that I'm teaching. So I do a lot of these bigger courses, which are, longer term courses with experts. And part of the benefit of taking a class with me is like you get access to my Rolodex, right? You get access to these amazing speakers and sort of co-teachers. And so I'm like, yeah, here's this person, and so and essentially they just agree to come on and teach and share to my community, which is incredible. And it's also these connections that are built that are, first of all, personal and professional. So I go to the Cannes Film Festival every year and have for several years, and it has led to incredible things. For example, staying at the villa where the official Forbes parties were for the whole festival. And, then I was like in a fashion show there as a model, and I sang at the gala. I premiered one of my songs there, basically networking with, the who's who in business, in film. So this past Cannes Film Festival, these are all connections that I can directly tie to podcasting. I went and was able to get tickets to the opening ceremony, which is a really big deal. It's very prestigious. And, walking the red carpet with like Sharon Stone and Spike Lee and these, it's like incredible. And my luggage had been lost or delayed it ended up being for 4 days, which is like
Yeah.
crazy. I had no dresses or anything. And through my networking and connection, again, all directly tied through podcasting, I was able to borrow a designer dress and, get everything coordinated in like 2 hours because I got my ticket and I had like 2 hours to like,
Wow.
get this coordinated. So I have these, if you look on my Instagram, which is Laura Powers 44, you can see me on the red carpet for the can opening ceremony in this beautiful designer dress, So it essentially in literally every area of my life has elevated, what it is that I'm experiencing. I have clients and podcast sort of hosts that I know all over the world where they like, hey, come stay in my compound in Mexico and like here drive my Porsche and have your this guest suite. Like literally, these are the kinds of things that happen. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
kind of like I literally look around a lot of times and I'm like, whoa, this
Yeah.
is my life,
Yeah. 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 And I can totally relate. 100% totally relate to everything. It almost feels like, which I want to highlight, is like it's about being in the relationships game, right? It's like it's really
Yes.
about relationships, and a lot of people look at a podcast and think it's a content tool and a marketing tool, and I believe it's the best business development tool that ever existed. Primarily because you are having potential conversations with partners or potential partners or like people that would probably do business with you if they got to know you and got to know what you stand for and what you care about. And maybe that is the next question, is like, how do you, once you get the relation, how do you manage the relationships that you have?
Yeah, first of all, I totally want to say absolutely you're right that podcasting is an incredible way to build your network, professional and personal. And my friend and fellow podcaster Jake Gallen, I think, said it very well. He has a podcast here in Las Vegas called the Jake Gallen Podcast, and he said, as a podcaster, you get to choose your friends. And literally, you can invite someone to be on the show, you have a conversation, you hit it off, and before long, you're getting invited to things. You're getting invited to partner. And in terms of how to maintain these relationships, I think just, be communicative, be positive, be a helpful force. And I just think it just will naturally kind of unfold that way.
So being sort of like of service to them, like seeing what you can do to help them, and how it's sort of like a win-win-win scenario, I think all around is probably the way to look at it.
Yeah, and honestly, if you have a show and you're offering someone a platform, in most cases, that's going to be enough. Like you don't even necessarily have to do more than that. I mean, it depends on the person and where they are. In some cases, if someone's really busy, it's they may not be to a point where they're even wanting other media. That's an exception. But in most cases, as a podcast host, especially if you have a popular show, like I've host several top 100 podcasts. So being on my show, if someone comes on my show, it's very typical for them to sell 10K or more in products and services. So that's a pretty, for most people, that's a pretty significant thing.
And it's really interesting how you say that, because it's like, I think that's what the power of the platform is. Like once you put all this effort into creating this platform, you've got to use the platform in a way that it can be used, like how you're sort of talking about with these events. And are there other stuff in the book that we should know about that like are really cool ways to use your podcast?
Well, yeah, one of the things I specifically talk about is how to book media. So I think most people are interested in the idea of television or kind of bigger media, but they just don't necessarily know how to do it. And it seems like this kind of elusive thing. So I go very specifically into some details of like, how do you learn about television opportunities? How do you pitch? How do you network and connect with other people in the media? And I think that's very effective, both as a podcaster and to level up the awareness for your podcast, as well as if you want to explore, other television and media opportunities.
So let's talk about your process then, or process depending on where you're at. What happens before you hit record? What happens when you're recording, and what happens after you finish the record? What's Laura's process like?
So it's interesting because when I was a newer podcaster, I think I felt like I had to do a lot of prep and I would pre-prepare questions and I would even have like the same questions that I asked some of my guests. And now as I've been through this process so many times, I really like to just kind of have an organic conversation and have it be more kind of off the cuff and in flow. That said, most of my guests at this point, I have some kind of connection to. Maybe they're a repeat guest or they've been referred by somebody, and that's really helped too. Where it's kind of like what you're talking about, like your podcast network becomes your personal and professional network in a
Mm-hmm.
way. And then in terms of my process, I have a whole team that helps me with my podcast. My editor is, in New York, and at this point, he's been working with me for several years, so he knows pretty well what I like and what I don't like in terms of the content, and he basically takes the first stab at it. Then take a listen to it, and if there's anything that needs to be, changed, then I let him know. It's a pretty streamlined and simple process
Yeah.
at this point, and I think I could probably do more with the video element, and that's something that I'm kind of working on and thinking about. But yeah, it's a pretty simple, kind of intuitive process for me at this point.
So what if anything gets in the way of you making the podcast? Like, I mean, there are lots of moving, spinning plates. The recording, the editing. Obviously, the editing is taken care of. Publishing, marketing. There's a lot of things that are happening. Sponsors. Like, so what if anything gets in the way, or like, what is there any sticking point?
Honestly, at this point, I just have a fairly busy schedule, and that's totally for my choice. And it's right now it's busy in the sense that I'm working on building more on the sort of entertainment side. Like I really want to be known more in entertainment as a singer, as a writer. I used to make my living as an actress while I was building my psychic business, and I essentially was like, I don't like this whole being poor thing. And I pretty quickly realized that I made more money as a psychic, and I just kind of shifted my focus. But the beauty of it now is I have a nice, successful business that runs without a lot of effort for me. And so I am spending more time and energy on kind of building and expanding in this new area. So I think that's probably my biggest thing, is just making sure I dedicate the sort of time and energy to my podcast that I need. But it's interesting because it takes so much less. I remember, I was in the beginning, just like a lot of podcasters, I was DIYing everything. I was the host, I was the producer, I was the admin person, I was the scheduler, I was the editor, social media graphics person, like all of it. Now I have a team, like I have a main assistant, I have an audio editor, I have a social media graphics person, I have an actual editor like for content, so it's much less on my personal plate to keep things running, which is great.
Which is crazy because, like, I think in business in general, or when you're starting anything, like, there's all these like different things that you got to learn to do, and just have to learn to do it and get it out of the way so that you can get to the next step, so you can hire someone to get it done, and you can do the things that you like to do, which is obviously like is socializing and making network connections, which is it seems like it's just in your wheelhouse, right? You doing that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I love networking, connecting. I think I'm a very social, person. So I love it. And I just love sharing positive information with positive people and connecting with positive people. And I have generally found that most podcasters are pretty incredible people. Like honestly, I know you host your amazing podcast event, and I haven't been to it. I hope to come to it soon.
Yeah.
But podcasting conferences are some of the most fun professional events I've ever been to. It's literally, I feel like it's like summer camp for adults.
It
Like,
totally.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of, really effective business stuff that happens, but I swear some of the most incredible meetings and networks and connections, like we're hanging out at the pool in Orlando, and then we're like, oh yeah, I want to be at each other's shows. Cool. Oh, we just happen to be like top 50 podcasters or whatever, and it's a huge audience.
Yeah.
These kinds of things just kind of happen very organically, and essentially, podcasters are influencers, and you're just networking and connecting with a lot of other influencers. And even if that particular person may not be someone that's a good partner for you, I guarantee they know a bunch of people that are.
100%. And I couldn't have said it more. It's like, I don't think people realize that podcasters have a platform, they have a voice, they have people that listen to what they have to say, and just kind of having access at any podcast conference to a whole bunch of podcasters is a really powerful thing, right? You're right, some of the most, and also because I think most of us like kind of have interviews type shows, so when there is a conversation that's not being recorded, it goes deep really quick as well. Like it's like straight in, the conversation is no like fluff necessarily. And I love podcasters as well. Like, I mean, it's so cool. And We Are Podcast, the way I run it is I have the speakers that come for We Are Podcast, but then I have a speaker retreat for 3 days after that. So all the podcaster speakers are hanging out in this one spot. So it's like it's my Christmas. So I literally created it because I wanted it, and I wanted. It's the most scariest thing I do by far is to have this event and try to fill it, but for sure one of the most rewarding things that I do as well. I want to talk about the part that you mentioned at the start of this conversation about people taking, especially family members, kind of going, what are you on? Like, this is so different. This is not normal. What you're talking about is like very woo-woo. I want to ask you that question, and I'll sort of talk about the mistake and then come back to like some of the tips and tricks you might have for new podcasters. But this is really important because I feel like a lot of us have these things that we want to say, but might not say it because, what if it ruffles the feathers? What's not the popular opinion? How did you go about dealing with that?
Yeah, first of all, if you're experiencing that, I have a lot of compassion for you. I think one of the hardest things you can do is step forward into your authentic voice, even when it's not the popular opinion. And I think there's ways to do it where you can be safe, like, maybe not trashing certain viewpoints, just sharing your own is one of the first tips is just focusing on the positive and what it is that you want to share and provide. Also, just recognizing that not everybody is going to be your market. They're not going to be in your circle, and that's okay. So basically just put your messaging out there and focus on those that are aligned with you or that want to hear what you're saying. And over time, those people will just start to connect with you if you keep doing it. And not to take it personally, like even with my sort of psychic spiritual work, I don't expect others to believe what I believe. They literally don't see the world the way that I do. I mean, I'm a clairvoyant. I see ghosts. I see angels. I see, dark entity things. I see crazy stuff for most people. Like to them, it's sci-fi or fiction or something. And like, that's okay. Yeah. I'm not expecting them to believe what I do. I'm not going to accept being attacked by someone. But I'm also like, you have different beliefs. That's cool. I'm not going to try to convince you. You have your beliefs. I have mine. And I'm just going to focus on connecting with the people who are open and interested in having a conversation, about what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And how did you like deal with that internally? Did you have times where you wish someone agreed with you or wish someone like supported you and they didn't? And how did you did you sort of really just brush it aside? Like, how did you process it, I suppose?
I think it's really important, the 4 agreements, like don't take anything personally. Like just because someone, even if they're like attacking you or whatever, it's like that's really more about them than about you. And just like don't take it personally as much as you can. Get out of that space or environment, like disengage, when you have that kind of toxic behavior. And then the other thing is just connecting and creating with those that are. And honestly, the podcast is one of the best things I ever did because I pretty quickly, put that messaging out there, and then people started to reach out and connect with me. So I have people say, do you deal with a lot of skeptics or is it hard for you? And I'm like, no, people just come and they're attracted in, and like my whole circle is extremely woo.
Yeah.
And it makes me laugh too, because I have billionaire clients. I have like very high level people in business, and most people would be surprised just how woo a lot of those circles are. And even like business, like I just was on a guy that I met, and he's a business podcaster, and what would we end up talking about but all this kind of energetic spiritual stuff on his show.
It's totally real, and I feel like in most entrepreneur circles, like after a certain point, after someone's come across their first mountain and kind of go, they're top of this mountain and they're kind of successful, and they realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm just on the middle level of this next mountain, right? And there's this other new level of impact. And I think most people that are over their first mountain and kind of have done some reps get to a point and they realize that, wait, there's a lot of energy and a lot of like woo-woo stuff happening anyway. And I think the quicker we tap into that, especially guys, because I think women get intuition kind of easier than we do. So for guys to kind of step into their intuition is like, and I believe that a lot of the entrepreneurs these days, especially the ones on the personal development journey, right, the impact ones, the ones wanting to make this difference, I think we all kind of on the same kind of thing. We feel the energy, we know the intuition, we know suddenly like that miracle happened, that is insane, and in awe of it, but then you realize the other reps that have been done around it for that to maybe occur. So I'm always, every time I have these conversations, I'm super excited because it gets to different parts. I'm just going to talk about this mistake and come back to you, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it as well. But then I also want to ask you what your tips and tricks you might have for new podcasters that are starting off. So, ladies and gentlemen, today it's mistake number 62. If you want a whole list of mistakes that business owners make with their podcast, because usually what happens is, like, you're a business owner trying to make a podcast, and there are these little small things that you don't get as a podcaster. So there are these little mistakes that we make that can be avoided if you just know what they are. So go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com, download your copy. Today is number 62, which is wanting everything to be perfect before you release your podcast. And this goes for anything you put out there, right? Even when I put a post out, irrespective of how many years I've been doing it, I kind of want it to be perfect because I'm like, well, what if no one reads it? What if it doesn't get traction? And it's just a common thing that we all deal with. And I think just understanding that the time you put it out and you actually publish it allows you to know more. And once you know more, hindsight is always 20/20. You can always change perspective. You can always learn from something that you've just done. But wanting it to be perfect before you publish it is like kind of saying, I want to run a personal best marathon, but never run more than a couple of meters or 100 meters, and there's the big difference, right? If you've never sort of walked or run, or you're not fit enough, then it's hard to kind of think of a personal best marathon. And same thing happens with podcasting. It happened to me the first time I went and tried surfing. I was like, this was a 3-hour surfing lesson, and we were on the sand learning to balance on the board for 90 minutes. And the first 90, I'm like, why? The water's just there. And then when I got into the water, I realized why we had to spend the 90 minutes on the sand. So I think podcasting is just like that. Go get your mistakes. Don't be perfect before you start, because I think you just keep evolving over time, to what Laura was talking about at the start of this interview. The big changes that happen when you start a podcast and you have these reps and you have these conversations, then you start to maybe find what you care about more. And then you find that you're going to double down on certain things, and some things stick and some things don't. And only by doing the reps do you actually find out what they are.
I completely agree with you, Ronsley. I just think that the best way to make progress is to just go for it. And you even learn, what not to do through that process, or what it is that you might even need to shift. Just again, that Thomas Edison example, he didn't try to pick the perfect light bulb right away. He just was trying to get something that would work as a filament, right? It's this process of trial and error. And you know what? Most people are pretty forgiving, actually. If you put something that's heartfelt and meaningful out there, people will feel into that purpose. And, when I look back on my first podcast episodes, and yeah, they're absolutely very amateurish, and I was and it was a different time with podcasting. They said it was so hard to figure out how to do things, 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah.
And I left them there for a reason, because I want people to see, look, just start. The most important thing is to start and then to keep going. Because I think some podcasters start and then they kind of hit this wall and they quit. And if you look at the number of active podcasts, it's, tiny fraction of the number of podcasts out there for that reason. So just, don't be a perfectionist. Just kind of do incremental upgrades and just keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's sort of land this plane. You've been doing this for a long time. 11 years is a long time doing podcasting. Obviously, lots of things are different now. We've got AI and the blockchain and all these kind of NFT stuff. But for someone starting right now, what would you sort of say, hey, don't focus on this, just focus on that? What's some of the things that you might have?
I think just focus on creating interesting conversations and something that's meaningful. I think a lot of early podcasters get too focused on the tech, and I get it because it can feel a bit overwhelming, but just, make sure you have quality enough sound and just get that content out there. And I can't speak highly enough to the benefit of networking and connecting with other podcasters. So join podcasting groups on social media, attend in person if you can, podcasting conferences. I swear, every time I go to podcasting conference, I get all these bookings just as a guest, which is very helpful for my business. And also, it's like literally, I have this incredible network of friends like all over the country and the world that I can go hang out with, stay at their house,
Yeah.
like, just have a great time with. So, and it's so much easier when you're not alone. So if you just are psychologically just feel like you're trudging along without support, emotionally or on the technical side, that's really hard. But if you have a group of people, like I had this this text chat with a bunch of people from Podcast Movement, which is one of the sorry, this one is actually from Podfest, at one of the big podcasting conferences here in North America. And it's fabulous. Like literally someone will be like, hey, I want to do more speaking gigs. Any suggestions? And they'll be like, bam, 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 bam. Like, here's a
Yeah.
bunch of ones to apply to. It's really that easy. It's incredible.
It is. I mean, I've been to Podfest a few times, and I love Chris and everything that he sort of represents. I think he's brought his culture into Podfest, which is this whole family
Yes.
belonging, and I love how he's done that. He's so hospitable. What a nice dude. Just before we wind up, people, ladies and gentlemen, healingpowers.net is Laura's website. But Laura, if someone's looking to find your work and connect with you, where's the best place to do that?
Yeah, my website, healingpowers.net, is great. I'm on Instagram, so Laura Powers 44, so 44, the number not spelled out. That's an angel number. That's a nice, easy way to connect with me. And yeah, I have tons of appearances on television, also on Spotify. And as a singer, that's one thing I'm doing more. My television appearance on tomorrow is I'm singing, which is great, is Spotify, and my artist name is Laura Michelle Powers. So all of those are great ways to connect with me.
Amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, catch us on another one of these live recordings. We've got one coming tomorrow with Rob Greenlee, who's Podcasting Hall of Famer and VP of Libsyn as well. So we have him on the show. And I've got another few amazing guests coming up. So catch us live. Laura, thank you for your time. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate you so much. And everyone else, I'll talk to you soon.